Welcome, Sikhumbuzo, and thank you so very much for making your work available for Tactile Visions Woven. It is such an honor to have your work on the exhibition.
Thank you for having me, Sharlene. Pleased to be here and chatting to you.
Sikhumbuzo, can you introduce yourself to an audience who might not be familiar with you and your work?
My name is Sikhumbuzo Makandula. I'm a Cape Town-based artist. I work multidisciplinary. I work with video, performance, photography, and film. Yeah, so that's basically Sikhumbuzo in a nutshell as a visual artist.
And can you tell us, speak specifically to the work that is on Tactile Vision?
Okay, the work on Tactile Vision, it's titled Mzilikazi. The work it's part of a bigger body of work that I've been doing since 2018. It really started off as a research work where I was interested in the life of the grandson of King Mzilikazi, who subsequently was buried in Makanda, previously known as Grahamstown. So in encountering with the narrative of Njube Lobengula, I learned that he was kind of forcefully exiled in South Africa in the mid-19th century. And as a young boy who studied in Cape Town at Zonneblom, he was taken by Cecil John Rhodes and his brother, Bezeni, from Bulawayo. It was basically like the tactic of stealing land within the Matebele land across the border in currently Zimbabwe state. So having learned about that particular narrative and the history of the royal house of the Amandebele, I was intrigued with the positionality of the grave site, that of Njube, that is, Lobengula Khumalo, which is currently situated in a township called Ndangama in Makanda. With the work, really, I was kind of struck as to where it is positioned, like the name of the township called Ndangama, meaning to give up, but also linking that with the history and the narrative of Njube, how he came to be buried in Makanda. As part of my research, then I also came across a song by Dorothy Masuka. It's titled Mzilikazi. And the lyrics of that song, they really inspired the series, Mzilikazi, and then kind of gave birth to the archetype character that is Mzilikazi. Because in the song, Dorothy, she sings about Mzilikazi who have left his progeny in foreign lands. And then within that song, also it's a lament as to when would these kids who are sort of spread out in the diaspora be brought back home. So then from those lyrics, what I did was to try to create, I came up with this archetype character. And within this archetype character, I started to traverse the landscape that is Makanda. And then I started to trace the grave of Mzilikazi. And what Mzilikazi starts to do, it is to look for a gravesite of Njube Lobengula, who is a grandson to King Mzilikazi, within the landscape of Makanda. So within the work, Mzilikazi really starts walking the gravesite, looking for the grave of the grandson. And as walking, also recognizing the other graves, because where the grave of his grandson is located currently, it is almost like one of the oldest grave sites in South Africa that is within Makanda. So in a way, it was really an homage to the history of the Ndebele royal house, but also it was to relook and revisit this particular history, which in many ways is overlooked, silenced, and erased within the psyches of many current Amandebele people, and also in South Africa, because even within the Makanda community, they don't know much about this particular history. So then the work really starts to think around ways of mourning, but ways of mourning at a larger scale, as to like think around how do we as nation think of the coming of the nation, or rather how the nation is birthed, and also what has to give within that process of birthing of a new nation. And in this time, I was particularly thinking about both the South African context, but also the context of Zimbabwe. But also I was thinking of ways in which we talk about mourning publicly and privately. And I was also interested to look at the advent of what are the ways, or what characterizes ways of mourning, but also what ways to speak to memorialization, public spheres, and also to think through human remains, because Njube Lobengula's human remains are buried in South Africa, but they belong to the Zimbabwe nation. And what does that process look like when you ask particular questions around what would it mean for South Africans to repatriate these human remains, but also because it meant that I had to kind of dig in a bit to try to connect with the actual royal family in Zimbabwe, but also within the Amandebele nation within in Bulawayo, to really sort of understand as to the positionality of this royal house, its meanings in the current day of the Zimbabweans and the Ndebele people that are based in Zimbabwe, but also in South Africa, because South Africa, as a nation, we hear a lot about our human, whether it be it artifacts, whether it be it human remains that has to be brought back in South Africa, political figures who've died in foreign lands, who needs to be brought back. And also, I was also thinking along the lines of cleansing, how we talk about, how we think around cleansing in relation to the landscape, in relation to traumas, that our bodies is subjected to by virtue of the ladenness of the violence laden within the history, within the landscape, within the political scape also. But particularly Mzilikazi, the series, it starts off where Mzilikazi walks the grave site to actually place flowers on top of a grave of Mzilikazi. And how this really happens is that it plays out in a very kind of a beautiful paradox in a sense, because Mzilikazi himself is fully adorned in a black garment, and within that, I was thinking around how a family betrayal of this young son who is forcefully brought to South Africa without his will, because there is evidence that he wanted to go back home, where he pleaded with Cecil John Rhodes, but never came to fruition. Then I was thinking as to what is a salient way, an intangible way to speak to this particular history, but also to understand where we're at the moment, particularly with as a South African, because I myself as a South African who works between the SADC region and also who works internationally, knowing such history, but also such orality, because I also started to look at the Mzilikazi, the Kumalo house clan names as to what is bestowed within those clan names, and then wanting to really unearth and unfurl out ways using sounds, using movement, using different flowers, protea flowers, like what is a protea flower in relation to our South African identity, how it comes to be. So within that, really, I think memorial work becomes quite important, because how it intersects with community histories, public histories, and also how we understand our collective identities as people within the SADC region. So the work really was about honoring this particular history, which is silenced, or rather which is almost overlooked and not really known by the public. So for me, it was a way to really connect. And also how I did that was to use archival material, some of the work I found in archives, sounds particularly, but also to understand at the interface of the colonial missionaries and settlers with the natives, what was that conversation at that particular time, but also the importance of that, riveting that particular conversation, I think, to understand our precarious positionality or the context that we live within. Yeah.
Wow, that's so many thoughts, Sikhumbuzo. Foremost as well is the irony, of course, of the fact that this course, if I'm correct, Sarah Baartman district, right? Or it was renamed Sarah Baartman district, and then the great injustice of Labingula residing there, right? But I'm also thinking, for instance, in terms of when I was in high school, one of the set books at that time, no, not when I was in high school, when my nephew was in high school, one of his set books was Margarita Poland's Shades. And there's a character in there, it's set on this farm in under colonial times. And there's one set of characters is this young white boy who grows up in a relationship with the young black boy on the farm, and much later on in the book, when the young black boy has to go away, and I think he's killed on the mines. The family weeps because they are not able to get back his body, and the young boy out of all the white family, because the white family of course doesn't care, right? But the young boy is the only one who seems to understand the black family's pain. And so he goes and he goes and he takes a tree branch from the family property to go try to retrieve the spirit of the boy. And when he does that, he comes back and he kills himself. He commits suicide. Wow. Because for him that was his friend, and he can't reconcile what he learned of what happened to his friend in the city, the injustices that his friend goes through, and he kills himself. And I'm thinking about that, and it was the first time I came to know about the custom of retrieving spirits in that way, and I'm also thinking recently, hearing about the renewed interest in Zulu love letter, for instance. And also in Zulu love letter, the ways in which the black mothers are there in constantly dressed in black, because they can't let go of children who haven't been
Yeah.
buried properly, whose bodies haven't been found. And so I think of your Mzilikazi character and how potent that is, um, particularly because seeing the evolution of your performances, right? That red clergyman,
Yeah.
that outfit that you had, and then so significantly when you burnt it in
Yes.
Makanda, and
Yes.
now
Yes.
the black costume that you're wearing in
Yes.
perpetual
Yeah.
mourning in a way.
Yeah.
Um, so can you speak to the evolution and the importance of these kind of sartorial codes in your work? Because it's
Yeah.
because in a way that, you know, the clergyman outfit was something that you wore, but now the costume has actually taken over you in a way, as if the grief and the mourning has actually also taken over your character. It's really,
Yeah.
it feels almost overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, you're right. Because in a sense, the clerical garment that I used to wear, in a way, it had to kind of like burn, and the way it burned in front of the St. George's and St. Michael's Cathedral. You know, it was kind of like a monumental kind of letting go. But with that in itself, because that the costume, the garment really spoke to a particular institution, really, or rather, it is associated with Catholicism, Anglicanism, you know. So really, the work was at the time understanding, or rather, looking at forms of various ways of violences within the psyche, you know, as to what is this institution which has come to dominate, and what the kind of a thieving that have happened, you know, of the land, of the mind, of the spirits, you know, the displacement and all that. So really, that work, in a way, it had to come to die, or rather it had to be put to rest, and then something following had to then another process, you know, the process of uguzila, the process of mourning, but mourning not in a sort of like a private mourning, but a public mourning. Because when Mzilikazi traverses the public realm, um, and anyone who comes across, they are always struck as to, is this supposed to be what? Like they can't really characterize as to, there is sort of like this kind of a strong feature around whether it's a male or a female figure, so there is like this sort of not a way to kind of box it, but also the way even Mzilikazi moves, you know, in space, because it's a way to understand, to think through that many mothers, many sons who have within the political spheres, you know, who never got the opportunity to be laid to rest, you know, and also because within the way the work itself happened, you know, there was an 1819 battle which took place there, you know, and then that the spirits of those people, you know, who are roaming, who needs to be placed in the proper burial, you know, within the living dead, you know. So, but also again, because for me, it's really to understand, because it was weird, because the other day I was watching this film called The Crown, and then it was really about like the British crown. And so I think it was King George who dies, the mother of Elizabeth. And then the Queen Victoria, and how then she, in a way, it was a way to proclaim how she, you know, like to proclaim that a king is dead. And then she was wearing this full, she was covered in complete black garment. And I was like, oh wait, she copied Mzilikazi? It was almost like, what's happening here? But also because I have an interest really in the history of costumes, you know, as to how we Africans understand with our interface with the settlers and the arrival, and how then we have taken certain costumes and appropriate them, you know, to fit our own customs and traditions, and, you know, and how that plays out, you know. So, and also because Mzilikazi is actually wearing this, what do you call this? The bowler hats, bowler English hats. But also Mzilikazi is completely veiled, from top to feet, he's completely veiled. So for me, really, it is to pose questions, as to understand, do we understand the precarious times that we're in? Do we understand the gravitas of history that we have to now inherit, Um, but also, how do we honor narratives of our mothers? Because Njube Lobengula Kumalo was a son, he was a grandson. How did his mother, how did his grandmother have an impact in his own life, in his own socialization? And really, I think the work of Njube Lobengula and the work that series Mzilikazi, really it is to think through, to understand as to how do we also insert narratives of our own mothers who've nurtured us, because the work also later on starts to speak to this in terms of thinking through as to how Njube Lobengula himself grappled with his notion of being handed over to Cecil, but also what was then the conversation between the mother of having to let go of his son, but also ways of mourning that culminated with this sort of a distance and isolation, of not knowing where your progeny that you've given birth to, what has happened to them. But also, I think when it comes to the materiality, I've been interested in to think through as to how, I think in a very strange way, I think within the many families, how Black families, particularly where like the mother would be the one who has to announce her state of mourning, perpetual mourning, and in a way, it was like, how do these women carry this grief? How they have to kind of like publicly be portray themselves in a very particular way. But also, how does then the people who are in looking at them, the reversal of the gaze, and how that becomes kind of a potent, so in these moments of interface, in these moments of the duality of who is looking and who isn't looking, so the work really starts to do many things than just like having to put on a garment or rather understand the garment itself. But I think really for me, at a historical level, it is to really understand as to how do we honor pain, how do we honor the violence, how do we honor this displacement, how do we honor our people who are displaced, whose spirits haven't been placed in proper burial or given proper burial, and to think through also as to as part of honoring the narratives and honoring the stories, how do we also emerge? Because I think within that we have to emerge, and as part of emerging, which I think is a thread within my work as to, yes, we deal with all these kind of like historical work, political, heavily laden, but how do we put things to rest, because these narratives can't just be, they have to be put to rest, and in putting them to rest, how do we honor them? What manner, a dignified manner of telling these stories? Because I think we have to respectfully and dignify our history, as bad, as violent, as gruesome as it be. In doing that, in honoring and dignifying that, how do we carry that as part of our everyday? So the work really is, in a way, it is part of trying to poke, or rather try to instigate those moments of questioning, but also those moments of ownership, because it is part of us, it is who we are, but we have to dignify the history. Yeah.
Sikhumbuzo, thank you for that. I mean, I think we can speak for hours,
Yeah.
for sure. But you're reminding, the way that you're ending reminds me of Molare's idea of the fact that we carry our 6 mountains on our back, but we're still moving.
Yes.
And I always I like to thank you for your work, because you always maintain some kind of feminist element to it as well. Even as in the ways that you work, you're always so mindful as well of the of ensuring that Black women, African women, their presence is always included, that they're always coming through, and that you're mindful of that, even in the ways that you've engaged yourself as mother and stuff. So I really want to thank you for that, and I really want to thank you for making the work available for the exhibition and for this fantastic conversation as well.
Yeah. Thank you to you, Sharlene, and thank you to the Turbine Art Fair for inviting me to be part of your exhibition. I'm really honored and glad to work with you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sikhumbuzo.
Yeah.